Yes, assalamu alaikum and good morning. Welcome back to the program now. This slot is being transmitted via the radio waves of Al Ansar in Durban and Peter Maritzburg, as well as the satellite broadcast of Salam Media, and now on our Facebook page and YouTube channel as well. Much has been said about the debate raging around the comments of the Chief Justice of South Africa, Mogoeng, and his views on Israel. If you go to a blog, it's called Constitutionally Speaking, produced and written by a constitutional law expert at the University of Cape Town, none other than Pierre De Vos. And I'll read from the webpage regarding, some of the views. Chief Justice Mogoeng caused a stir last week when, in a Jerusalem Post webinar, he seemed to criticize South African government policy towards Israel, stating that as a Christian, he was under an obligation to love Israel and to pray for Israel. But what can a judge say? Where are the limits, and where are these limits crossed? Let's chat to Professor Pierre De Vos with regards to this. Good morning, sir. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, and thanks for having me.
All right. So, in your opinion, how do you view some of the comments that the Chief Justice has made? Uh, is he allowed to, under South African law? Has he transgressed, or where are the limits?
So the judges in South Africa are not prevented from speaking publicly. So there's a code of judicial conduct. It says if you're going to comment, you can't criticize another judge or another judgment unless it is in a legal setting, so in a judgment or in court. But you can comment on legal matters, on the judiciary, on the administration of justice, as long as it's done in a temperate way, with restraint and so on. What you shouldn't do is get involved in political controversies that is not directly linked to legal issues, to say the protection of human rights, the rule of law, democracy, and all those things. And that is where the Chief Justice gets into trouble, because he didn't make a statement. He himself says, as the Chief Justice doing a legal analysis, he made a statement as a Christian, and the statements are highly controversial. They are politically controversial. I mean, we all know that anything you say about the occupation of Palestine, it is highly politically controversial. And he did so also in a kind of intemperate language. So the response to that is, some people say, well, you have a right to freedom of religion, and you do. In South Africa, you do have that. But if you have a judge, that right is limited. You cannot use your religion to get involved in a political controversy. And the reason for that is, if all the judges are going to make politically controversial statements that is not directly linked to their job, we as the citizens are going to trust the judiciary less. It's going to have less legitimacy and authority, and that is bad for the democracy.
What level of adherence does a judge of his stature have to follow in terms of South African position, South African international relations, and the line that they've taken, which are in total contrast to his comments? But how far do they need to be congruent?
So once again, there you must make a distinction. So if a case came before the court, and it was, say, the case about the president of North Sudan, al-Bashir, and then the judge said, well, the government here really made a big mistake. We should have arrested him. South Sudan is a bad place, North Sudan is a bad place. That would be acceptable because it would be in a legal judicial setting. But if any judge cannot criticize the South African government's foreign policy with dealing with anything, whether it's about Donald Trump or whether it's about Brexit or whether it is about Israel and Palestine. And that's really the problem, because there's a separation of power. So judges are not involved and should not be involved in the other branches of government. And unless they are required to do so for their job in a legal setting, they shouldn't really issue an opinion in public, at least, about these matters.
Do you think there'll be anything, any action taken against Judge Mogoeng regarding what he has said?
Well, I don't know. There was talk that some groups were going to complain to the Judicial Service Commission, the code that I spoke of. is enforced by the Judicial Service Commission. Of course, the problem we have is that the Chief Justice is the one who's actually the head of the Judicial Service Commission. So this is a very awkward situation, because the very person who's being complained of is actually the head of the body that is going to deal with the complaint in some way. He will have to delegate that to the Deputy Chief Justice, Raymond Zondo. I would imagine he will have to recuse himself. I don't know what they will find. I think there was a breach of the code. I'm not sure they're going to say it's so serious that it would warrant an impeachment inquiry. But there might be there's another process which is for cases where a judge did something bad, but not so bad that it is serious enough to have that judge removed. Whether that is the way they will go, I don't know. It's very difficult to know exactly, because the personalities involved, and the Chief Justice is the head of the JSC and so on.
Some of the support for Israel from a legal perspective may be very controversial because of the various international legal pronouncements that have been made, the illegality of the occupation and the settlements in the West Bank. Does that have a bearing? Because what the judge is basically saying, or possibly saying, is that he does not regard international law.
Yes, so that is a bit tricky in the sense that I wonder whether that is now something that falls within the code of conduct. I'm not so sure. That is the general basis for criticizing the position that the judge has taken, that the Chief Justice has taken, which is slightly a different point. So there's the point of a judge shouldn't really get involved in these political controversies, but then there is a substantive criticism. And we as citizens, we have a right to criticize judges when we think they do or say something that is really ignorant or is against human rights and so on. And this is one of those cases, obviously. From a legal perspective, one will be able to point to all the human rights bodies who have found that the occupation is in breach of international law, that the security services of Israel are always often in breach of international human rights law. And so you can make those arguments, but that is more going to the substance of the issue, not to whether the judge is permitted to say this or not, I think.
Mm-hmm. And looking forward, perhaps, if the Honorable Judge Mogoeng does then continue with his work as the Chief Justice of South Africa, if a case involving human rights issues comes before his court, do you think that what he said could be used against him, brought up against him by people who may feel that he has sided with an oppressive state against the Palestinians?
Yes. So our court is actually quite lenient about such things. In previous cases, they said you have to ask whether there will be a reasonable fear that the judge will not be impartial in this particular case. So I think at the moment there's a case before the Constitutional Court about hate speech, in which one of the interested parties is the Jewish Board of Deputies. And so the judge, I think, sat in that case. The judgment has not been handed down. I think the judge might have a duty to recuse himself from that particular case because it involves somebody who spoke about Zionism and so on. And so I think there might be a reasonable apprehension of bias. In another case, not dealing with the Israel question, because the courts are quite lenient about they're not easily going to find that there is a duty to recuse yourself. It might not apply in those other cases.
Finally, Professor, looking at the influence or people that try to get influence over people in power and in significant positions, judges, how closed should they be to outside influence organizations, propaganda movements? How do they protect themselves from being influenced?
Yeah, this is difficult. Of course, judges are also human, so they're not superhuman. They are going to be in the public domain, and judges have to make that decision every time. If I invite some judge to come and speak at the University of Cape Town, the judge has to decide, okay, what is the platform? Is it some place where it's going to look like I am promoting a certain interest group ideology or so on? So these lines are sometimes difficult to draw. But it is, and it's judges should not refrain from going and giving speeches and lectures and so on, but they have to always be wise in not only that they shouldn't be influenced, but they shouldn't act in a way that it is going to create the appearance that they are influenced. That is, the appearance is just as important as the actual situation.
Professor Pierre De Vos, constitutional law expert at the University of Cape Town, and also the Deputy Dean at the Claude Leon Foundation, Chair in Constitutional Governance. Thank you so much for that insight this morning and for the interesting discussion.
Thank you very much.